Okay. All right. Hello or good afternoon, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. I am going to be able to talk to you all about all of the wonderful work that I've done, and I'm glad that you just ate, so you feel relaxed and you're ready to hear. And then you'll be so sleepy you won't have all these questions. No, I'm just kidding. But I do hope that you find it useful and interesting. It is definitely an honor to be able to be here and speak with you all and just kind of share with you a very intimate work for me personally. I'm in a cohort at Charlton where we were kind of talking about problems of practice and dissertation work and kind of looking at those two things, what really hits home for you. And so this particular research study hits home for me. So it is a phenomenological study in the sense that I'm not walking in there assuming anything. I'm just really trying to find out the experience and what are the things that are coming out of it. And specifically of teachers of color, but not just any teacher of color, they had to have worked in a predominantly white district within the last 5 years. So that's the phenomena that I'm really looking at, as you can see in my title. But I just really want to make sure to reiterate, it's about being a teacher of color in a predominantly white district. You're not necessarily connected to other teachers of color. You may not even have a lot of students of color. You may have a few. So just to give you some background, because I knew I was coming here and you guys are from all over. So this is Texas. That's where I'm from. Being in a Texas school, Texas actually does have a pretty diverse student population. We're getting a pretty diverse teacher population as well, but it's concentrated. It's concentrated to where the students are localized. So like if you were to look and see in our teacher population, Texas teachers, we actually have approximately 27.58% Hispanic teachers, which is not horrible when you look at some other places, but at the same time, our student population is 52. Okay, so we're not even close. We're not even close to representing the actual amount of students that we're teaching so that they can have a representation for them within the school. It's important for teachers to have, schools to have diversity of teachers. And that's kind of an initiative. So in Texas, with our Texas education codes, districts are required to figure out how do you recruit the teachers, how do you get the teachers on board, and they also have a moral obligation kind of written in there to ensure that you have good role models, good representation for your students. And so when you think about what we're doing in Texas and what we have, we're close, but we're not as close as we should be looking at it. So I personally work in a predominantly white district. I am obviously a person of color. Surprise. But when I was looking around the rest of my district, we weren't reaching our own demographics. We weren't reaching our own representation of the breakdown. Okay, so in my own district, we weren't doing this. So I was curious, is that happening other places? Is that a problem for schools that may not have such a high concentration of minority students? And then when we do have minority students, how are we going to reach them? How do we reach them? A minority child in a predominantly white district deserves to be reached and be seen just as much as a cluster of minority children in a school that is predominantly Black and Hispanic. There's not a difference, but we tend to do that in research, and we tend to do that when we cluster and move. Oh, there's lots of them, so we go there. And what about these? What about the students that are in the other districts? So just a little bit of background about teachers of color in general. Most of us are familiar with Brown versus Board of Education. It's considered the big groundbreaking, move of integration. My dad was there for that and the integrational move. And so this was kind of the start of what we would consider a decline. And this is where I started. Okay. So if you really were to look at America or even look at Texas or anywhere prior to that, you really were considering two types of race, white and Black, for the most part with segregation, right? And when you think about it, they all had to be educated, right? And they all had separate schools. And now we have what looks like a very diverse education workforce if you were to look at it, okay? Because you had schools that had to teachers that were teaching in black schools. You had teachers that were teaching in white schools. You had teachers that were black teaching black students. You had teachers that were white teaching white students. Is this okay? Not at all. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that we had several educators of color. We had principals of color. We had administrators of color. We had all kinds of things going on in that segregated world. So when we integrate the world, because we need to be able to integrate, we need to all be together. It's not okay to be separate. Where did the educators go? Where did the administrators go? Where did those people go? Because the kids are still here. The students were still there. The students still need to be educated. So this is the first part of that decline. And they are leaving because although we integrate the schools, there's no mandate to integrate the faculty. And it's not going to be something that a black principal is able to walk into a school and be over a white staff. That was not going to happen. We weren't there yet in America. So that principal leaves, or that teacher goes, or that teacher goes into another job or another career, and they start a new generational trend for their family, not a trend of education. They start a new trend. Now I'm a banker, now I'm a lawyer, now I'm a whatever. Okay? So we had a problem. They were leaving. They were gone. Now, it's important for students to be able to see diversity within the workforce of education. Workforce training starts in the classroom. A student can walk into a classroom, see their teacher, and say, I want to be a teacher. Or a student can walk around the building of a school and see an administrator and a teacher conversing professionally and say, oh, that's how professional communication happens, or that's how collaboration happens. That's that workforce training that we do. They have to be able to do it within their classroom as a student level, but they have to be able to see it modeled as an adult level. So if you have no diversity, how are they seeing that races actually should be collaborating together? How do they see that anybody being of a different race or color doesn't mean that you're not able to be an authority or be respected? How are they seeing that in an adult manner? How is that being modeled for them inside the actual classroom? I also noticed I say we because I feel like you're now with me. So if I say we, you're with me in this study now. But I also noticed that teachers of color were not leaving the profession because they were bad at their job. Okay, they weren't leaving because we said, oh, you're horrible T-test. Our T-test is our appraisal system in Texas. They weren't leaving because they were getting poor ratings. They weren't leaving because someone said that you have crossed the line and you must be fired and you have all these reprimands on you. They were leaving because this ain't it, basically. They were leaving because they were tired or they were burnt out or because, you know what, I don't like how I feel here. Okay, there's something wrong here. So then they would leave their districts. And some of them leave education. So looking at the schools that were predominantly white, you'll notice that first it's like, oh, you have this teacher of color. And then that number is gone. In Texas, we account for all the teachers, all their race, what their levels are. And I can look at that on their TAPR report, which is the full accountability rating. And so then you'll see the decline of the teacher of color. And then I can see increase of teachers of color in other districts. So there's an assumption, but some people have moved around. Some people left and they have moved around to the more urban district is what's probably the assumption there. And then you can still see that there's a decline, and that's when it's a question of, are they leaving the profession? Did they move somewhere else? Did they go somewhere else? And so that's not always clear. But we do know that we have a lot of teachers leaving the profession now. And we do know that we have a lot of teachers that are done with what's going on inside the educational world. So I had to come up with a purpose. And the purpose of this study was to just say, hey guys, you're in a unique spot. What's happening? What is it like for you? Because I could come from study after study after study after study about what it's like for a teacher of color in a urban district, a teacher of color working with low socioeconomic students, and teachers of color working with their own race or working with their parents or working within the community, but I could not come across enough information for the teachers of color that were working in isolation and serving students that didn't have many people around them. What is it like for that teacher? Because what I could do was look at the demographics from 5 years to 10 years of just Texas in general and see how the students were ever changing and see how urban schools were gaining more and more teachers of color and students of color, and rural schools were also starting to gain more and more students of color. But the teacher population was not moving like that. So who's serving those kids? Who's giving those students that type of interaction? So I just told you this is why it's important. It's important because no student should ever be taught by one single race. They really shouldn't. If you want to have a positive trajectory, according to Rationale and Burchett, no student should have one single race teach them, because they need to learn how to interact with other races. They need to be able to bring on their own cultural awareness of how I'm unique and how are you unique, and how do we meet in the middle and respect each other. That's a skill set, and that's a skill set in SEL. That's a skill set that we try to teach them. We try to teach each other how to respect everyone, how to respect the uniqueness of you. Well, if everyone around me that I always interact with looks just like me, has my same beliefs, has my same everything, have I ever really learned how to respect others, or have I just learned how to respect the same? So it's important that they interact with other races and other ethnicities. So when you have a diverse faculty, you have a built-in support for families of various backgrounds when they come. When people come, I don't want us to live in the academia world and think only in theory. Let's be honest. When you walk into somewhere, you kind of scan and say, is there anyone that looks like me? That's a natural thing. So when a family comes to a school and there's no one that ever looks like them, I don't know how you're going to treat my kid, because I don't even know that you have anyone ever different to treat. That's a real concern for them. So when you have a diverse faculty, it builds in this level of support and comfort, which helps move forward with the whole idea of the community and school collaboration, which is necessary for any kind of culturally aware or cultural pedagogy or culturally relevant teaching. You got to have support of your community. You got to be able to move forward with them. So moving forward, because I want to get to the heart of the people, and you want to know about the people too. This was the framework that I was using for my particular dissertation. I was going to take the lived worked experiences. I was going to look at whether or not they were experiencing any microaggressions or not. I was going to look at it through the lens of CRT, because I wanted to know, are you experiencing any type of racism or not? And if you are, how does that affect recruitment, retention, and your social outlook as a teacher? So racial microaggressions, basically just, am I being dismissed as a person? You know, my beliefs, my culture. And is it happening several times too? That was another thing. And I love how it was described here as like an annoying mosquito bite. And I don't know if you ever had a mosquito bite before. No? Yes? Yes? Yes. And it's annoying, and it bites and you itch it, and it's like a little longer. And then think about being bit by several mosquitoes all the time, and you get upset, and then something happens. And so that's why I left this up here, is because it's just, I feel like it's perfect. You're bit. A racial microaggression is being bit, small. It's not huge. You may not even recognize it happened. It was probably more like an annoyance, like, how dare you, you know, and you just kind of move on. But after so many times, I'm over it. I'm done with you treating me like this. I also used critical race theory, and I went through these particular tenets. So counter storytelling, whiteness as a property, permanence of racism, interest conversion, and critique of liberalism. And I will talk more about those a little bit later. So I just wanted you to know what we were kind of pulling their experiences through. This is the phenomena that I was speaking about before. Only teachers of color in predominantly white districts. If they were working in what is considered an urban district, or a district that had more minority students, I could not use them. They were not a part of this study. And a predominantly white district was defined as a district that had at least 85% white students. Okay, so just so y'all are aware. Okay, and it's 85%, so that means there are minority students floating around in the district. These were the two research questions. What factors contribute to teachers of color decision for employment in a predominantly white district, and decisions to exit or remain? And then, How have the lived work experiences of teachers of color in predominantly white districts impacted their individual views of themselves and the culture personally and professionally? So that's what we were kind of looking at. And just kind of going down through some of the literature really, really fast. This is key because of what we're going to hear about. With the Plessy versus Ferguson, the separate but not equal has a lot to do with racial congruence. Okay, with racial congruence, looking at this is when we had separate but equal, you had more racial congruence happening. Okay, and you're going to see a quote here from Dr. Wright about how that impacted him. I'm not saying that that time was good. I'm saying that the idea of the teacher of color being with that student of color at some point in their life, that congruence is so powerful at some point in your life. It's really important. Also, many black teachers and administrators that served in these schools seem to make the workforce diverse. And so I've already talked about that. Sorry, I kind of went over your history before. The context is what I was talking about before as far as our education codes, and it's necessary for Texas school to be able to find a way to recruit teachers, find a way to recruit teachers of color, find a way to recruit any teacher, teachers that are breathing, teachers that want to be there, find a way, okay? Find a way to bring them in, whether it's through salary, strategic recruitment, or word of mouth. But they were not recruiting teachers of color to the predominantly white district. Now, most of the predominantly white districts did have recruitment, like they'll have their signs up and they'll have, we're hiring, and they'll have job fairs, and oh my gosh, there's all kinds of competitive salary analysis that are going on with all of these districts that these teachers of color came from. But that's not how they got there. None of these recruitment strategies actually brought that teacher to them. And so we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So this is the account from Dr. George Wright, where a black teacher explained that being black was not an excuse to reach his full potential. Racial congruence. He could have that hard conversation. He could tell you, just because you're black doesn't mean you'll need to be less than. However, after integration, his white history teacher of the 11th grade told him that he would not excel to post-secondary. And this man was the provost of UT Arlington. It's that dissonance. And they will encounter it. Students will encounter it. I don't want us to sit up here and pretend like we can completely erase it. Students will encounter that dissonance. But because he had another teacher somewhere in his whole entire matriculation tell him you can, that is something you hold on to. And to know that it was a teacher that represented him. That was very powerful. So, teachers of color offer a mirror and a window in the hard truths. A mirror and a window. We need to have teachers of color so that students are able to see, one, a mirror. You look like me. You may not act like me, or you do use the same words as me. A window. I might be in a hard place, but you don't seem to be, so there's hope. Maybe I could aspire to be something like you. And then a hard truth. It's not easy to do this. It's not easy to walk in your shoes every day. And what that might look like. So, minority teacher deficits, we just talked about this, the changes of the changes of integration, the changes of licensure is an issue that happened. And then also, it seemed to be that there is a gap in the changing demographics of where the schools are going, okay, where the kids are moving to, where the teachers are, where are we looking for them. Recruitment is difficult because education majors find that you want to contribute to society, and others find that they want to have a career advancement. So that was something. The more we are in America, the more we want to move towards being individual, the more we need money, the more we need to be rich, the more we need to be contributing to society gets further and further away. So you have fewer education majors in general. And then changes to the certification program. So, the people, what we're here for, right? So I had 7 wonderful people that I got to learn about their lives. Ashley, Jake, Courtney, Joshua, Brenda, and Veronica, and Benjamin. And this is the race or the ethnicity that they identified as. And I say identified as because even in my own dissertation, Ashley identifies as Asian. And she will tell you, not the Asian like China Asian, her words, not mine. But she's actually from Trinidad. She's from Trinidad. She goes, I'm Asian because when I became a natural citizen and they said, what do you want? And I said, none of these really fit. Is there other? The lady said, Asian. So all her paperwork says Asian. Asian. And I wrote about it, but
it's sad but funny.
It's sad, and she laughs about it too, but at the same time I was like, this is exactly what we're talking about, just not even being sensitive to who you are as a person. Who you are as a person. But she says that she's Asian proudly and welcomes all of the Asian students within her school. And she has a hard truth, as well as Brenda, about coming in to the country. Coming into the country and ensuring that students do not overly assimilate. That's what she said in her interview. You need to keep a piece of who you are. Don't do like I did and come in and feel like you had to fit in all the boxes and do everything that they asked you to do, that you lose your culture. She goes, my children don't even know I'm not white. And they lost their language. She's lost part of her language. She's having to teach them more. Jake is a coach, and he has traveled back and forth between urban districts and white districts, back and forth. And when he leaves, it's because he cannot handle how it feels in the district, in the white district. So he goes back to a black district, but he's always considering the kids he left. I left them. Who's going to speak for them? Who's going to help them? And so he goes back, but Jake wants to be more than a coach. And immediately when I talked to Jake, I was like, okay, well, you're in a predominantly white district now. You know, tell me how you got there. Yeah, I'm here right now, but I'm not going to stay long because they're not going to hire me for more than a coach. I didn't even have to ask more. Immediately he assumed they're not going to hire me for more than a coach. So Courtney had an interesting coming into her teaching experience. She came from another state, came to Texas, and then when she was looking for her first teaching job, she landed in a predominantly white district. She interviewed several places, and her resume was pristine and very good. And she says that the predominantly white district that she took a chance on took her and drove her around to the schools and said, well, there's only 2 schools that are open to diversity. So that's where you'll interview. 2004. So Joshua, on the other hand, also a coach. Joshua wants to be involved more in his district as well. He has gone back and forth too. So he's seen predominantly white districts. He's seen urban districts, and he is looking to be an administrator as well. Joshua had been interviewed as an administrator within his district twice and wouldn't get any feedback. Asked for feedback, wouldn't get any feedback. Got an interview call within his district, and then the principal wouldn't call him back to tell him whether he got the job, and he almost missed another opportunity in another district. But everybody else got a call. So Brenda, she will tell you that she is a proud Latina from Puerto Rico and that she enjoys being here, but she stays within the predominantly white district because this is the landing spot. She came from a different organization. She was a pharmacist and worked in chemistry, not pharmacist, sorry, she worked in pharmaceuticals and is a chemist and worked for a very prominent medical, make the medicine, I don't know the right word, y'all, sorry. Thank you. But she left that to be with her kids, and so she became a teacher. And she knows that many people come from Puerto Rico to here. And she stays. And she stays within that predominantly white district for the families. Then we have Veronica. She's a young teacher, and she likes to speak her mind quite often. She enjoys being very tech savvy. She enjoys making things. She enjoys seeing her kids. But Veronica will tell you, I am on the outside of everything. I am not the typical black person. That's how she defines herself. I'm not the typical black person, and people need to see that black people don't always act like what they see. And I said, okay, what do you mean by that? And she mentioned that I don't always want to listen to hip hop. In fact, I don't like it. I don't like to eat all of the foods that everybody thinks you should eat. I don't enjoy half of the things that most people enjoy. And when I look at my circle, everything around me is very much what you would consider white. And she said in parentheses, but it's just what I like. And I stay in my predominantly white district because students need to see we're not all the same. We're not all the same. And then I have Benjamin. Benjamin, this is his first predominantly white district and his first experience. And he flat out says, I walked into the interview and I asked them, do I have opportunity to grow here? Because I looked at your website and nobody looks like me. He kind of caught them off guard when he asked that. And he said that he was assured, yes, you have opportunity to grow. But then in his story, he says, but I'm waiting to see if that's really true. He wasn't sure if that's actually a true thing. So moving through this, most of this is how I went through and took their stories, made an assertion, and then took and made a theme. All of these were delivered back to each of the participants as well. I want to make sure to say that. To say, this is your story, this is the assertion, and this is the theme that came. Is that right for you? Because when you're dealing with someone's experience, you don't want to misinterpret. And I don't want to speak for them. I can't say what's for them. So in looking at all of it, the thematic breakdown was about respect, acknowledgement, promotion, and advocacy. And these were all of the different numbers of assertions that fell under that. So as you can see, it's still pretty high for advocacy and respect. That's where it holds the weight for these particular teachers of color. And then acknowledgement and promotion is what kind of keeps them going. So when we talk about respect, you talk about things that Veronica experienced. You talk about Veronica being able to see that a teacher could come into her classroom, yell at her, cuss at her with her kids standing there, and she tells her principal, this is unacceptable, it's not okay, can you help me and do something with this? And the principal says, aren't you being a little aggressive and sensitive about it? To Veronica. When we talk about respect, we talk about Ashley, who I told you is from Trinidad, so has an accent, and kids constantly come in and say, I don't understand what she's saying. I don't know what she's speaking. I don't know what she's saying. And then the counselors will yank the kid out of the class and give them a different teacher. We're talking about respect. We talk about Benjamin and Jake, who see kids constantly using the N word, and it offends him, and they watch the administrator hear the same word and say nothing. Or we talk about Joshua, who constantly just wants to be seen and did have a positive aspect of respect because the principal finally saw him, but he didn't see him until after George Floyd died in front of everybody. And then started asking him, what's your experience like? But he'd been on campus forever. So we talk about promotion and growth. We talk about Courtney, where Courtney is wanting to be seen, wanting to do more, wanting to get her degree, and asking people in her predominantly white district, hey, what do you think about your doctoral program? Hey, you just got your doctorate. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And they tell her, oh, you don't need to do that. You're fine just there. But then as soon as she leaves and she goes to a not predominantly white district, they encourage her to move forward in her education. Why didn't they see me there? And people I thought were my friends, and they see me here. We also talk about Benjamin, who I just told you wanted to make sure that he was going to be able to grow and asked if he could grow. Joshua and Jake both said, I'm sitting at a glass ceiling. They only hired me for the box that I checked. Coach. They don't want to help me move forward. So we talk about acknowledgement. Brenda actually had a great experience of acknowledgement. She was asked to teach an AP class, and she was asked to be able to do more in her content, and she felt so validated. She felt so elated because that was a coveted type of thing. Acknowledgement for Courtney was being able to be asked to teach a PD. She felt so validated because you saw my craft. An acknowledgement for Joshua was being able to have his team bring him together and say, hey, what do you think about this particular science teak? How would you teach it? Not acknowledging the experience that they actually had. When we talk about advocacy, you can talk about Ashley and her experience of telling the kids, don't over-assimilate. You don't have to lose who you are. I've got to stay here because I need to be a voice for them. Or we talk about Brenda, who says, I am here and I want the girls to know that a Latina can be a scientist. That's what I'm here for. I want them to know that they can do different. Or we talk about Veronica, who's just telling a different story. Or you can talk about Benjamin, who's a coach also, but says every day, what you do here on this court is not the only thing that you need to do. You need to learn another skill. You can't live off of this dream. You need to be able to do more. And it takes the time to have the conversation to do more. So this is just the idea of what we just talked about. And I think you've kind of gotten the picture of what each of those themes really are and how they're actually defined within my research. And for the sake of time, I'm kind of moving a little faster because I'm long-winded. But I also took them through their critical framework. And so I do want to make sure to stop on this and then I'll be done. The counter storytelling. I had to pull all the experiences through CRT because none of the participants stated they actually experienced any racism. None of the participants stated that. None of the participants stated that they felt a microaggression. So I took their experiences through CRT and looking at it. Participants' experiences were against the assumed story of work. We're supposed to respect each other at work. Work is a professional place. There's a certain way that we act. There's a decorum according to work. Their stories didn't match that story. They did offer a counter story. Veronica herself said, I am here to be a different story than the stereotype. When you look at whiteness as property, and I did leave a disclaimer in the dissertation about whiteness as property, if it is offered to another person, and if it's not offered within the district, let me back up. If it's not offered in the district at all, like acknowledgement, like we don't acknowledge anybody for anything, we just expect everybody to do their job, then that's fine that they didn't get acknowledged. But if you're specifically acknowledging people that are not of color, then you're offering a whiteness of property tenant. Okay? So in these things, Ashley said Susie Q was being able to get some accolades for something that I already started doing 2 months ago, and now all of a sudden she's doing it, and she's the one who gets high praise for a novel idea, but I was already doing it. Or the fact that another teacher who was asked to be a teacher leader and didn't have good data, but Susie was higher degree, she has a master's, she had more data, she had better teaching practices, she didn't get offered. She didn't get approached or asked. And you have Veronica, who also talked about how she had a Susie, which is interesting. They're all Susie, so we have our own bias as well. But she had a Susie that was being able to yell at her the experience that I just told y'all about. And it was Veronica that was in the wrong. So they also talked about their permanence of racism, the structures themselves, a glass ceiling. You don't need to move any higher. You need to stay right here, and keeping them kind of oppressed. And then you talk about interest convergence, where Veronica is very tech savvy, so they use all of her virtual lessons. They want things from her. And Veronica said it specifically, I can build your table, but you won't let me sit at it. And that's what she experienced and felt. And you have Joshua and his male experience and helping with black men, and then you have Brenda being able to translate for Spanish-speaking families, and everyone commends them for it, but you only want to use me when it seems to be beneficial to you as a district. And then we have the critique of the liberalism and color blindness. And all of them talked about color blindness. All of them talked about how it's almost like nobody wants to talk about the race of the kids in general. You don't want to bring in their uniqueness into the classroom. You don't want to bring in anything new that they're doing. And then we talked about Jake, who really got really passionate in his interview about young black men. And granted, this interview was recently after COVID in 2020. And he said, they're not telling them their real story. They're not telling them the real truth. And I have to be here. I have to be here to tell these black men the real truth. So this was just kind of the breakdown of those experiences. 6 of the 7 had enough experiences that you could say that they've experienced racism at work, whether they wanted to say it or not. They were experiencing it, and they were experiencing the trauma of it. And then also the acts of racism, 2 of them, sorry, I said it's intimate work. I'm sorry. Acts of racism themselves affects 2 levels of deficiency: respect and acknowledgement. A teacher has to be respected. A person has to be respected. And a person has to have acknowledgement and esteem. They have to feel like they belong, and they have to feel like you see them. 7 of the participants noticed that they have various deficiencies in students' shared culture. The kids don't understand. That was a deficiency. I feel like, as a person of color, the kid of color just doesn't understand. No one's been telling them. No one's been helping them. They also, and there's never an academic deficiency. Let me make sure that's clear. There was never an academic deficiency. Just a deficiency in how are you going to navigate through life with all these other cultures without understanding, 1, how you might be viewed, 2, how to navigate that safely, and then 3, how to rise and overcome it. All of the participants discussed interacting with their leadership fondly at certain schools of predominantly white districts, but not all of them. And that's where I found that that could be the key, the leadership. The leadership, how that leadership works within those schools. So this is kind of how that framework went. Recruitment and retention. You keep them, you get them, and you keep them if you see them. You get teachers of color, and you get teachers in general. Amazing, right? All people. If you see them, you respect them, you acknowledge them, and you promote them. And then advocacy was the biggest key for them, being able to do that. So my time is like way up, isn't it? Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So really fast, in a minute, let me show you this. And this will help explain everything else. Maslow's hierarchy and servant leadership. Those were the theories, along with asset-based theory, that I went back to re-look at based off of all of their experiences. And this is why. Because at the basic need of human beings was a need to belong and a need to have esteem. And if you're experiencing an act of racism in your workplace, you can close your doors. You can be with your kids, and you can teach your kids never ever to do what I experienced. You can teach your students to be better than what I'm working with. But after too many times of you having hit here in your workplace, instinctively, you have to leave. Just like now, this need right here, safety and psychology, is causing the massive exodus of education in general. Is school safe? Is this worth it? And can I feed myself off of this salary? It's causing a mass exodus of everyone else. It was causing an exodus here for teachers of color. That's the psychology that we have to get at to be able to understand how do we put all of these wonderful, beautiful practices into play. And it's on an individual basis. And know that the teachers that walk in and stay are probably operating at transcendence. Just because you can operate at the top of the pyramid doesn't mean that this is always getting fulfilled. And when it's not getting fulfilled enough, you have to leave. You have to go, because your pyramid will crumble. So servant leadership gives you opportunity to figure out, what does that look like for people? Collectively, individually, build strong relationships, look at them, build that esteem, strong work ethics, strong moral values, strong core values are all at the heart of servant leadership. And every single one of the leaders that they spoke fondly of had those values, which led me to servant leadership. So that's it. I'm sorry. I'm so long-winded. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.